Hey everyone, and welcome to the GRC Room for 5 Questions. I'm Mike Andrews here once again with Karina Clever, and we're happy to welcome guest Frederick Livingston, who's a co-managing partner at McDonald, Baas, and Livingston PLLC. How are you doing today, Frederick?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks for joining us today. So we're looking to get right into it. Without further ado, let me pass it to Karina for a brief intro in the first question.
Thank you so much. So I'm Karina Clever, founder of Clever Compliance, and we do compliance management as a service. So let me ask you the very first question. What part of Cyber GRC do you believe businesses struggle with the most?
You know, that is a good question because there's a number of areas that we could really hone in on. But in my experience, I believe that the risk management portion of it is the most difficult portion for businesses. And I would say that because a lot of times the focus tends to turn to making sure that there is governance over, the compliance, and that there's a lot of checklists that, there's lots of different frameworks when it comes to compliance. We could be talking about GDPR or HIPAA or any of the different technical frameworks for cybersecurity. And when the company is just focused on making sure we are enforcing or governing compliance with those frameworks, you tend to have gaps. And what I mean by that is risk management should be strategic in that you're looking at the enterprise. Where are the vulnerabilities? Where is the most valuable information? Are we allocating resources to make sure we're managing those to risk? And many times when we see that there's just a list of checklists that companies are making sure are being followed, there are gaps there. And I found that if you are not familiar with the entire enterprise and where the vulnerabilities are, where the most valuable pieces of information are, you can just struggle with making sure that you're seeing the entire picture.
And actually, I'm going to add to that for a moment because checkbox compliance, I think, is just kind of doing our entire industry in. And the checkbox compliance lists really need to be made appropriate to your actual operations. And the risk management, the risk registry info needs to contain a lot of the failed controls. But when the controls haven't been lined up to your actual operations, it's almost impossible to do proper risk management. So spot on. Mike, anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's a big one. We talk about this a lot, right? Like everything should be risk driven and tied to the business because every business is different. And if you do risk first, then compliance, you're a lot less likely to miss things, right? Because all compliance is risk. It's compliance risk, but not all risk is compliance. Some compliance, like GDPR, it doesn't care about every cyber risk in the world. So that's a really big one. But Frederick, moving on to the second question, I know you know this area really well because this is part of our initial discussion. Data breaches, we see a lot of them, big companies, small companies. What's one data breach that stood out to you the most and why that one?
As you said, there's a lot of them, and some of them, I was looking at this question and it's always difficult to answer it. But the one I had to settle on was the Change Healthcare breach. And the reason I settled on the Change Healthcare breach, well, one, the size of it in and of itself is big, but also when I, got to read about it and really study it, understanding the background and how it came about was pretty significant to me. And I know many of your users know, but essentially it's traced back to a failure for multi-factor authentication. There was a remote user login that somebody was able to obtain access to, and there was no multi-factor authentication, even though the company required multi-factor authentication on any of those remote logins. And it was just kind of going back to our last question, there were a lot of checklists there and a lot of things that were supposed to be done, but sometimes when you got that many checklists, that many things that are supposed to be done, it makes it difficult to actually enforce it. It might be number 20 on a list of 15, 30 things, or excuse me, number 20 on a list of 30 or 40 things. And if you just haven't gotten to it yet, then you're going to have a big hole in your in your enterprise. And I believe that when these the executives were questioned about it and they spoke about it, the head of cybersecurity was actually aware that there was this gap, and it was in the works. They were in the process of getting to it. But that one really stands out to me because that's a situation where the most vulnerable systems did not get attention first, in my opinion. And there could be many other reasons and many other factors there, but when you have a situation where there is a policy in place, that tells me that it was an acknowledgement that was a risk, significant risk. And when you fail to make sure that you're governing that compliance, that tells me that there were some other things, some other priorities that took precedence over that. And I find that to be very significant because, well, one, multi-factor authentication is just, it's almost, I think every cyber insurance policy requires it. It's almost a no-brainer at this point for most companies. So hearing that was certainly surprising and significant to me when you talk about the amount of users and the amount of data that was involved in that one.
Absolutely. And that was a big one. It impacted something like 2/3 of everybody in the United States. Karina knows this one well, and we've talked about that on some prior webinars. Karina, what do you have to add about this?
Yeah, so a bunch of different failure points, right? I actually pull HHS OCR breach reports pretty regularly as part of presentations. Right now, the one I just pulled on the 6th of January, 82% of the entire US population is involved in a investigation of some sort, ongoing investigation. So this means that if a breach happened 7 years ago, the investigation took 2 years and they closed it 5 years ago, it would not appear on this report. That means these are just active, ongoing investigations across over 700 providers, some of which have had multiple breaches in the reporting period. So absolutely tragic. I think this is something that really needs a lot more attention. And I think data classification, meaning knowing where that most important data is, isolating it, putting the most stringent controls around that data in particular would be so wonderful. So, okay, next question. What is the most impactful GRC-related advice that you have ever received?
Oh, I tried to narrow this down. I had a couple of them, but I would say number one is your vendor's security is your security. Your downstream, your vendors that you're using. It's not the type of thing where you are able to give, access to a company and assume that they are doing what they need to be doing. That is absolutely one of the most important things that I've been told. And it really does, when you understand that, it changes the way that you look at the relationships that you have with vendors, changes the way you look at the contracts you have with vendors, the requirements, the things you ask your vendors when you're going through the process of determining who you're going to use. So that would be probably the single most important thing, because I've seen it impact several companies, so many companies, and I believe the data would suggest that the smaller the company that you're dealing with, usually the less controls, the less security that's in place. And many times you might be dealing with a vendor that is a fraction of the size of the company that it's servicing. And you would assume, and you might even ask, you might even ask them if they do certain things, and they may check a box. But if you don't actually have the data to support it, you don't have their incident response plan, you don't actually have audits, you don't actually have anything to rely upon to ensure that that vendor is approaching security in the way that you would want it to, then you're in a bad position, because there's going to be a huge gap there, and it's going to be difficult for you as a company to monitor them thereafter if you didn't do it at the beginning.
I have so much to add to this, but we're very short on time, so I'm going to pass it over to Mike for the next question.
Yeah. Yep. TPRM is so big. Doing this stuff is hard enough when you have full access to everything, but with TPRM, you're kind of working with one eye closed, like in the dark. So that's a big one. So Frederick, moving on to question number 4. What do you do differently that allows you to excel in this field?
And I think this comes from my background. When I worked full time through law school, I went to law school at night and I worked full time at Comcast. I was a network technician. I did commercial installs, commercial trouble calls, all those different things. And I think that technical background definitely helps me to marry the legal side with the technical side. And when I'm looking at different companies or different, just different issues, understanding where the legal vulnerabilities meet with the technical vulnerabilities is certainly an important aspect. And then just making sure, I think one thing in networking and in just those types of fields, one thing you learn very quickly is you don't really know where a problem is unless you understand the whole circuit, right? You have to understand the entire circuit, exactly where information is going, where it's flowing from. And that gives you usually the best insight into the vulnerabilities. And if there is, and many times what I've seen is that you have certain executives, you have almost like a language mismatch where you have the technical team talking to the executive team, and the technical team's talking about, technical aspects of the company and technical aspects of the network, and the executive team is just hearing, well, how much is this going to cost? How much manpower is there going to be that needs to be apportioned? And they're not truly appreciating the strategic opportunity that those types of interactions and that type of, I guess, exercise provides for the company.
Absolutely right. Agree with you. All right, last question then. What is the top thing that a business can do today to strengthen its cyber GRC?
Well, I'm going to go back to a couple things we discussed. One, I would say, is ensuring that you are aware of your third-party vendor contracts. You are up to speed with what exactly their security stance and their security protocols are. And then, I got to throw in there, making sure that multi-factor authentication is enabled on, these remote logins, making sure people are not, no one, whether it's your internal company or your internal employees, your vendors, no one is able to easily access the system without you ensuring that there is proper security protocols in place. And then I guess the last one is education, making sure that your employees understand the why behind the policies. Many times they look at it as, oh, this is just another annoying thing I have to do to get to my work. But once they understand the why behind the policies and the why behind the compliance requirements, usually we have a more educated employee and somebody that's going to appreciate the vulnerabilities in the cybersecurity world.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Karina, what do you think about that?
I say yes. Actually, I have a ISC squared or ISC2 deck coming up on the GRC summit on the 22nd of January, where I'm going to be hitting exactly all of these things. So spot on. It's a huge gap between the contract and real world and assumptions.
Yeah, and Frederick, you brought up the fact that you worked in these fields as you were in law school, and I think it really shows, and it made your writing even better because it sounded really good in the legal perspective, but also the technical perspective. And I think that's really valuable because you'll get a better outcome for one, but two, you'll also relate to people better, right? Like yes. We're not attorneys. We're on the cybersecurity side, doing governance, risk, and compliance. But when I read that, I thought you'd be good to join us here, and look where we are now. So that's just an example of how that works. So to close us out, Frederick, I just want to say thanks for joining us. Other than LinkedIn, where can people find you?
Well, they can always find me on my company's website. That is www.mblfirm.com. And also, I work with IASIU, which is the International Association of Special Investigative Units, doing the same type of thing. Many of our insurance clients are seeing just a flood of cybersecurity related claims coming in. So dealing with those claims has been, being on the forefront of that has been a rewarding experience for me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys for having me.
Thanks.
Of course. Thank you.